I'm based in Vienna, and we are also based in Vienna, and that's basically it with the camera for today. And like Ras already said, I'm going to cover today is powerful document automation for, of course, and with the focus on finance and operations today. But also we're going to have a look on this on a broader scope with CE, BC, Microsoft 365, SharePoint. So basically on how to make the most out of the architecture you have with the document automation capabilities to have and what we can offer to further enhance this. Before we jump into that topic, one thing that I'd like to just quickly mention is this was in London. I think Ras, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the last Saturdays they were on site. And the two important parts of this is, of course, first of all, this guy. You can probably imagine who it is. And Ras, I want to thank you again for the community, for all that you've done again today with that event, with that amount of people and the organization behind it. It's always great to be a part of it. And of course, also you out there in wherever you sit in the world, in the evening, in the morning. It's cool to be part of the community. It's cool to come together. And the second one, of course, Ras has already mentioned it. We like to give away Legos. And I was just in our office 2 days ago. So there is one Volkswagen that's very sadly sitting alone in our office and is hoping to go somewhere in the world. Ras, we haven't really decided on how we're going to do the quiz. So do you want me to do it today, or is there another means you have in mind?
I believe the way it's going to happen is it'll be selected, I believe, well, randomly, I believe. So the people who are attending the session, it'll be selected randomly. And there's lots of prizes we're giving away. Obviously, that's one of them. Yes, so that's going to be selected. Maybe we can get a vote as well from the best session as well. It'll be good to give something back to the speakers as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to run some surveys, and people who complete them will be elected into the prize draw, and then obviously that will be announced in the following week. So yeah, so that's what we'll do.
So that's a mean of bribe, saying the best vote for our session gets that? No. No, just kidding. But well, let's Ras will do the raffle then, and let's jump into what we've prepared for today. And like I said, we will have a broader look into document automation today and what is Docs42 doing evolving around it. And of course, the main part will be a lot of live demos. So we'll cover the document automation part around a sales invoice, where we'll do some minor changes directly in this case in Word. We will also have a look into how to set up the template design in combination with SharePoint directly in finance and operations. We will also have a look into a entity report, so in this case, the vendor report, and how we can get data from finance and operations entities into a Word, Excel, or PowerPoint document, how to design those. And like we said, we're also going to have a broader look into document automation. So we want to get the most out of the Microsoft ecosystem. And from the list I've seen, there are a lot of people joining also with partners. And so if you also work, if you also have customers that work with CE, that work with SharePoint, feel free to join till the end, because then we also have a look into CE and SharePoint. And of course, questions and answers. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to use the chat. We're happy to address them. And yeah, so much for that part. Well, when it comes to document automation, it usually is the question of structured documents. And the challenge we face with most of our customers is that structured documents nowadays, also with the trends, that it's not only going to be just one system at all. Structured documents have to come from many different data sources. And well, of course, there is finance and operations today, but also we're getting a lot of projects now where customers want to use the best from finance and operations and the best from CE, and also with the common data service, Microsoft is pushing that. And the challenge is to get all from these different data items, the right documents at the right time. Will it be emails? Will it be PowerPoints? Will it be documents? We've also often heard today that, of course, these documents is not linked to printing documents. it's digitally, but for invoices, for quotes, you want to have a document, you want to be able to send that to the customers, and that is something we can do. Before we started with Docs 42, we had a look into the document creation part, and also of course the product itself. It started from a service company. So when doing all the documents for all the different companies, we realized there's huge potential in this. And the reason is very simple. Document generation usually is done in a couple of many ways, which I would just want to quickly address. With the first being copy pasting is, well, we've all done that, right? So you take the old document, it's the new version V3 final, whatever, and you also copy paste the old errors. You do it in the evening many times, so it's very error prone, of course, also because it's a copy paste. You can copy the old errors. It's stress because it's sometimes in the evening, and it's something that can totally be automated. Then many of you have probably had a VBA macro expert in your organizations. And the good thing about this is it's a high level of automation. The bad thing about it is if these guys leave, or if that guy leaves, or if it's on vacation or a holiday and there's a problem with the macro, it's usually very, very hard to fix because it's not easy to change what somebody has already done in their logic. And then, of course, there is what we know from SSRS, for example, where it's great to have the documents automated directly in finance and operations, but it's very bulky to do whatever the customer wants to do in minor changes, or if you also work in your organization as the one responsible for it. It's sometimes very hard to do the changes that users request, and it would be easier for them to just do it themselves in Office directly. The current technical options that you have with the Microsoft platform, as you can see them on the slide, is of course on the one hand side, everything is very, very manual, where you are directly in Office, where you're with mail merge, VBA macro, or also the automation. And on the other hand, there is the SQL reporting services, which are automated. But like I said, everything you want to change in your design, you have to program. And we've also had a great session today from Ludwig, Dr. Ludwig, about the ERs, which also is the next level in document automation. And what we try to do is basically take the best from all of them and combine them. So you have the Office design directly, but you also have the server-side automation with the Docs 42 server. When looking at the process of document generation, it's usually three groups that are involved. And those three groups, from left to right, IT, business, and also the marketing users, have different ideas about documents. And each of them, if it is within IT, you want to integrate your data at the right time. You want to have the logic applied to if there are conditions, you want to automatically include parts in documents, but you don't necessarily want to care about the contents. That's something that the business users should do. And that's also something, if it's about the CI, marketing users should also be able to do. And we try to take the best of each core competency and put them together in a process that's very slim and easy adjustable for every document that you will do at the end of the day. We currently work with 345 customers, and we are working with a lot of partners. So if you are working within a partner company, and what you'll see in the live demos, if you like that, just address me directly. I will have my contact emails at the end of the session, and we can also discuss, of course, about the partnership. Well, and the main part about Docs 42 is that you can do design in Office, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and you can integrate the capabilities of that document generation into basically any application that you want. Docs 42 itself is, on the one hand side, you design the documents in Office, like I said. On the other hand, it's a web service, and that web service can be flexibly integrated into a customer's environment. And it's not a coincidence why we always bring Lego. So we see ourselves as a document generation Lego that the customer can use in finance and operation, that he can use in SharePoint, that he also can use, God forbid, in his SAP if he has two ERP systems at the same time, maybe if there's a merger, for example. And at the end of the day, it's easier for you as the partner to service this because you have to just train one product. And at the same time, from a customer's perspective, if you have that one tool that you can use in multiple scenarios, it's very handy. That's quite a lot of customers that we already work with. And there will be only two I take for a quick reference, and then we will jump into the technical part for today. If any of you works at ABB, you might have already stumbled across Docs42 because you're using it, in this case in Dynamics CRM, for your sales and service platform. And the story that that happened to ABB is the one that I just mentioned, also with the Lego thinking. They started with the CRM product and with the CRM project, and then Docs42 basically developed within the company with leveraging multiple hours of document generation per year. The same we had in an ERP project with the Rewe Group, which is one of the biggest retailers in Germany. And if you buy any of their internal products within Germany, the documentation around it will be automatically done by Docs42. Okay, so much for the part where who's going to use it. Let's jump into the techniques. The left-hand side is the Docs42 add-in. This is where you place all the potential fields from finance and operations or any of the data sources we see in a second. And then on the right-hand side, you see one of the outputs. It could be a PDF directly. That's the data sources we can integrate. So we very frequently have projects where there's a combination of different data sources. Of course, we'll today have a look mainly on finance and operations. All you see today, of course, is also available for AX. So if you have 2012 R3, the same thing you could also do with AX still. But of course, we're going to focus on finance and operations today. Any of the data sources that you see here can be combined, which is one of our biggest USPs, that you can combine different data sources into one document. And this is the way you integrate them. So in a Word document, that's always going to be the first part where you start your document generation process. You as a designer will define where you integrate the data. And for example, in this case, we have a data source, that's the employee data. And this would be then in finance and operations, which we will see later on, the report data, the table data, the entity data, whatever you want to integrate in there. And you can simply drag and drop that into the document. With these drag and drop links, it's not just only string data that you integrate, but you can also integrate images. You can integrate, like we do, charts. And you can calculate them automatically with Excel. And of course, there's a barcode integration, which in an ERP project is very important. We're going to include an ERP code, a barcode today, just very simple and very quickly in the live demo as well. And when the document is ready, what can you do with that document? And since the Docs42 server itself is a web service, there is parameters that define what should be done with the document. And the scenario that we will have a look on today is, of course, the generation directly in finance and operations. But at the same time, we will archive that document into SharePoint Online with metadata, with archiving, with, of course, as SharePoint delivers out of the box the correct versioning and the correct version history. Since it's integrated into SharePoint, can of course be integrated into Teams as well. And a request that we had frequently for a project was, for example, in SharePoint, the Docs42 server can also provide different output formats. So if you at some point would want to create one document that should be as a Word in SharePoint, that should also be perfectly fine. And that's also something we're going to cover in the live demo. Same for emailing, printing, yeah, and the rest. If you want to be creative, you can also create HTML emails. And if anything of the above is still missing for you, then there is both input and output custom. So again, coming back to the Lego philosophy, that there is custom data sources and you can integrate based on C#, program data that should be into that document, or you can program where the document should go to. And if you have your own archive system, that will be the way to go. The service itself is available for you in your environment as a web service that you can then simply install and use wherever you want it to be. If you want to go for a cloud option, there is also one that we provide. So you can have theoretically a cloud-only approach, or for example, you could also have your own secure AX 2012 R3 with the Docs42 server being somewhere in your environment, and it's also perfectly fine. There's an integration, of course, also with Flow. So this one you see right there is one in CE. And if there's any change to any change to the data directly in CE, the docs42 document will be generated once again and will be placed into the same SharePoint folder. And based again on the version history, everything is still manageable on whether you want to see what has happened to that document and where has been some changes in it. All right, so much about the business talking. Let's jump into the live demo. What you see is a standard invoice journal, and let me just take one of these and generate the invoice. What this is going to do is it's going to trigger the docs42 server for the document generation part. There is some configuration directly in finance and operations, which we'll see in a second, where we define, for example, if the sales invoice should be done with docs42 or if it still should be done with the standards SSRS, because of course there are many documents that don't have the requirement of the design capabilities that, for example, an invoice or a quote should have. So you could take both from the best. So you take for some still the SSRS, and for the others, or ER, of course, and for some, then you just take docs42. The integration, like you see, we're missing some data here. That's on purpose. So I want to integrate some information in here. We'll also include a barcode at some point. You have some pro forma. If it would be the actual invoice, that would be deleted, which is a condition you can define in that document. We have a repetition of different products. So depending on how many products you would have, of course, the transition to the next page will be automatically done since it's standard Office. And the same applies then, for example, to having the table top on the next page as well. All right, there is a nice looking advertisement in there as well. This advertisement is a sub-document. So in many cases, it makes sense. For example, if the sales units have a Word document in SharePoint Online, and that is always going to be the advertisement they're going to add to different documents. So theoretically, the sales units could just change that Word document, do everything in it, and that will be automatically again used for the document directly in finance and operations. So for some processes, you don't necessarily need to involve IT where you don't want to be involved, especially for minor changes that kind of take the schedule or the time off of you, where you are on other projects and you really need that time. Then the last page is a switch from portrait to landscape, which again, as we are in Microsoft Word, is very easy to do. All right, so much for the sales invoice. Let's have a look why that sales invoice is automatically generated with docs42. And we have had a great session on the lifecycle services. So docs42 is integrated with the lifecycle services. You also get the source code. So in case there is anything you want to change or it needs to be changed, adjusted quickly based on requirements, you can do that. And I've added them to my favorites here. Of course, they are within the system administration. And there are the docs42 parameters that we're going to have a look on in the beginning. And there is a general tab, which is basically just including in the service. So in this case, that's our cloud service. You can leverage that service just for a specific company or for finance and operations entirely. And what you see coming back, there is an Azure application that is connected as the docs42 service. So we are security-wise within Azure Active Directory, and there's nothing that service can do apart from what Azure Active Directory is allowing it to do. We're not going to have a focus on the Azure app today as it would take too much time. But if you want to have a look also on how we added this in Azure Active Directory, there's a lot of other videos that I can post in the end. And of course, there's also a documentation on how you integrate that. Next part, in the users, you can define who would be able to define the reports and the data entities. So for the sales invoice, of course, as the first part, we will focus on the reports, but we also, like I said, do a vendor report, and that will be a data entity report. And then let's jump into the reports, and that's the point in the parameters where we define which report should be generated with Docs42 and which should still be done by the standards. Now, if we have a look into the sales invoice, this is what we see here. And in our sales invoice setup, so if we go to the report setup specifically, there is different documents we can define per language. And there's also other options you have. You also see there's an email template name. So later on, we will send an email also based on a Word document. There is an email subject. This is something that Docs42 specific. So we are taking data that is going to be inserted into an email subject automatically. We are having an attachment name automatically, and there's also be a sender type. But let's not worry about this for the moment. The most important part for us at the moment is the template name, because the template name shows us where the Word document is that either some people from IT or also very little users, usually from the business units, are able to change. All right, that's standard SharePoint Online, and we're having a finance and operations templates library. In here, you also already see that there's a for sales CE templates library. So both templates are maintained in the same location. If structurally it makes sense to do that separately, or if you want to have different sites for different applications, of course, this could be separate. It's just a matter of your architecture or how you want to maintain and manage your templates. In the AX classic scenario where you use an on-prem server, usually the documents then are just stored on the server, and changes can then still be done locally, so you don't never need to have Office on the server. Well, in here you see different, like we also have a collection letter. You see that there is some bodies, but the most important document we want to focus on today is the sales invoice as the one that we can change. And if I open this locally in my Office, I'm basically switching personas. So I have, when generating the email, the sales invoice, I have been in the persona of the user, just generating the document, and I'm now switching to the designer, which in an organization usually are very, very few people. Since you want to have, like it is already with SSRS, you want to have centralized design, but you want to have the flexibility from all the users that can do, if necessarily, minor changes. All right, that's the Docs42 add-in. Like I said, very few users work with the add-in. And if I click on Insert Data Field, I will be able to drag and drop any of the fields that I want to include in the document. Before we do that, let's just quickly do a demo from the document locally. So even on my local machine, I'm still able to test the document and to see how it looks like. It's going to present me with a transaction ID, which is the last report that we have generated. So in this case, the same that I've just generated in finance and operations will give me some demo data for a new document. If you view them side by side, we'll see what, based on the blue fields on the template on the right-hand side, happens to the document on the left-hand side. And if I zoom in a little, I hope you can still see it. You will see, for example, in here we just have one line, which is very important in terms of the repetition. If I had more products, it would be, like I said already before, dropped, filled in with the data, table data, all the way to the bottom, or even if it's more than just one page, will be on the next page. Then this advertisement in here is something that's coming from another data source. So if we check this, if it's not just string data, the blue fields, you can also define a type. And in this case, we are defining a Word doc. And if we just quickly browse through them, we will see there's also many other options. So there's numbers, there's date time, there's images, there's barcodes, there's image maps. So if there's a condition for an image, you can include that. You can include entire Word documents, PowerPoints, PDFs. So like I already said, it's a broader approach to document generation where you want to have a very flexible and modular document approach. And in this case, the advertisement that we've included here is something that is, again, in SharePoint. And we also saw this before. There is an add in here. And if we have a look into, I've just opened this already. All over. Let's change it a little bit. Dynamics. This is already very small for me. I'm guessing will not be able to see it yet. Right, so you should be able communities. So even if it's within a typo, it should still be with the actual data. And let me just quickly save this to SharePoint. And so the next time I generate the document from finance and operations, or also locally, it already should take those changes. Then if we switch back to our template and also the other document, the last part, like we said, is this just a switch from portrait to landscape, which is an Office standard. So you don't need to really know anything about Docs 42, but it's just a matter of Word. One thing that I'd also like to mention in terms of the cultures, because when it comes to numbers and cultures, it's a topic that usually comes with some questions. And for example, we're including the invoice amount here. And that's defined as a number. The format string can be anything that you define for yourself. But the most important part, there is a culture in here. And that culture has, first of all, you can define what should be the output culture in the document. And you can also define what the input culture would be. So, for example, we're having one customer that is working globally in retail. And in their subsidiary in India, the numbers have to be completely different as it is to, for example, Germany, as it is again to the States, with the decimal symbol, with the thousand symbol. And with the culture defining, you have input and output, then you can basically decide for each document. And if you, for example, this is the English one, then there is another one that's Spanish. Then you could define in here the input will be English as it is coming from finance and operations, but the output should be in the States format, Spanish format, whatever culture you want to use for this. Right, so then let's quickly include some more information that we wanted to do. We wanted to include the invoice address. Very bad with typos today. Invoicing address within the line. There we go. So that's probably the sign when you see it's a Saturday. You're not even able to type invoicing address. Anyway, so let's do this for here. Then also let's just include let's take in whatever ID. Let's use the invoice ID as, in this case, as a barcode. And we want to include, let's take a QR code for the moment. We can also define a dimension here. We want to have this with still very small, 30 pixels. The rest of the ratio, again, there is a tooltip, will be either done in respect to the ratio, or you can also put in whatever you want. So if it's 30 and 10, would probably not really work well for barcode since it's a rectangle. So I'm just going to put in the first one. Right, again, let's just quickly do a test here. Right, so that's that. And also, as a matter of Word documents, let's just quickly do some formatting. Let's make it red and bold. I can save the document. Quickly test. And that looks good. And also one more thing, let's do well, that's not really a case for the invoice, but just to generally show you, there is something called automate range, and in that you can define conditions for text areas. And if I include something like, for example, again here, let's take again the invoice ID. is equal to some value, then this should show up just as a matter of demo. And then you can also drag and drop this to wherever you want this. So if this would, for example, go to another page break, or if even a page break would be included in this area, you could do that. So let's just quickly jump back to finance and operations. And go to our invoice journal. Some of the new ones. Right, there we go. So obviously my condition is not true, so there is no information on this. And also on top here, you see the QR code. Let's just quickly make it the other way. If it's not equal to, you can also insert the operators here. And if we trigger the document generation for another document, it should show the text. If not, I might have been too quick for cache. So, I don't know. There we go. All right, so much for what you can do in the document. Probably your question also is, where is this data tree coming from? And there is the Docs42 data map on top here. In the data map, you already see that there's a couple of data sources, and we are just going to have a look really quick on the sales invoice. Basically in here, you define for yourself which reports you will read. And like we've already seen before, not all reports have been able to, or Docs42 is not able to read all the reports because we've defined which ones it should. And that's the list of reports we are able to access. And in, for example, if you choose for other companies to have different data integrations, then this is going to show here as well. You can then decide if you want to use the header footer, if you want to see the lines or something else. And of course, you can also select which fields you want to have in that report available. And at any point, you can always preview the data. And that's just going to show it really quick in the data tree. All right. Now the same thing we also have for entities. So there is a data source and an OData source in here, as you see. And by the way, all of these can be combined. So let's just have a look on the OData source. Before connecting to the entity, what you can do is, of course, define your Office 365 URL. If you work with user credentials, that's perfectly fine. If you already work with multi-factor authentication, we recommend to work with client credentials then. And of course, you can also save them encrypted. So this is the way to go if you don't want to have the actual service user to be able to read the data, but the data will be read through the client credentials in an Azure app that is then defined on what it should or can do in finance and operations. Yeah, and once connected, you would be able to read any of the entities and then also link different fields. Now, in the reports, you could also theoretically get data from the report, then also based on the information, link to the entities. And that's also perfectly fine to do with the Docs42. It's just a matter of performance. If you want to go ahead with, it's quicker or it's faster from the service if you go ahead to have it in the data provider. So if it's limited data, I would recommend to still have it in the data provider. If it's going to be more complex, there's also the option to include the entities for the report. But it's very scenario specific, and that's something you have in mind. Let me know and we can discuss this. As you see down below here, there's also CRM data. So basically, for example, if there is an account in here and there is also a connection that is provided in here, we can also include any, let's connect to CRM at the same time. We can also read any of the CRM entities, whatever there is. Let's take the, okay. There it is. And then in here, you can again select which fields you want, which one you want to read. There is the account ID. And let's say, for example, the account ID in CRM and finance and operations match. Then I could also do a linking of is equal to whatever information I want to link it to in the sales invoice, into whatever there is. You can also combine those. All right. So much for the template design. Of course, if there's any question at the moment, just feel free to put them into the chat. I don't have a look at the chat like simultaneously, but rest you probably have. So if there's any question that pop up in the very moment, just let me know. Great, then let's go back to finance and operations. While we have done the triggering of the documents, we also had an archive enabled, and that archive was automatically saving the document to SharePoint. And what I'd like to show you is there is a D365 finance and operations documents folder. We just sort them. And for example, I have generated those two documents 5 minutes ago, and there's, you see, the file name makes sense, and also the metadata directly in SharePoint makes sense. And the way to do this, again, is in the parameters. So if we go back to finance and operations, and we have a look into our parameters, there is, first of all, there is a SharePoint site that we can define. Of course, you can also use other archives, not just SharePoint. Just want to point out SharePoint today. There is a site that you define, which is already the one I just showed you. So the D365 site that we have, and there is a specific library. And we're also going to do a fixed user authentication and authorization for the one uploading. So that's my user in this case. If we go back again to the parameters and check out our report, and then go to the sales report, there's two things I want to have a look on. First of all, it's the SharePoint mapping, which is the reason why the correct metadata is included in SharePoint directly. So you see there is a column called invoice ID, which is this column. And it is going to take a value in Docs42 language from that data source. So the line invoice information, it's going to take the invoice ID. And the same, of course, is happening with the invoicing name, and that's also done here. Now, the last part in that is the archive setup directly. And what I would like to show you really quick is in the printer setup for this, you could also, again, change first of all, of course, the file name. So let's take the dynamics.com again. Underscore sales invoice, and instead of a PDF document, I want to include a Word document. Okay. Go back to the invoice journal, since everything that I've just started with, I can include now in the document. Again, let's just do the original preview here. And while we're doing the generation directly in finance and operations, at the same time, again, the archive is triggered and it will be pushed into SharePoint, this time as a Word document. Now, functionally, of course, I understand. Let's also check for the moment for communities. So it took the change we made in the ad. Functionally, of course, in many cases, it does not make sense to create an invoice as a Word document because you don't want anybody to change it. But it's just a technical means. So if you have scenarios where you want to output Word, that's perfectly fine. And if we go back here, just refresh our D365 documents. Right. I might have been too quick with the changes. Didn't take it yet, but you have to trust me. So I just tested it yesterday, and maybe I missed some saving there. But you can then just save a document in there and then edit it again. All right. Then let's jump back to finance and operations. I told you we also have the option to create entity reports. So if we jump into the Docs42 parameters again and go to the data entities, you see there are entity reports, and these are again the same principle. It's a vendor report. It's going to take some linking in terms of what I will select. We'll see that in a second, and it's going to show in the entity on top of here. So that's the Docs42 button, and wherever you include a data entity report, it will show and it will be able to take the current data. We've done so in the all vendors. And in this case, the data sources that we've seen before, it's not going to be only the report data source, it's just going to be an entity report, an entity data source in this case. Right, let's take whatever, and there is the Docs42 button up here, and then I can do the vendors, again with the standards, and then just go to Docs42, and that is going to print our vendors report, and it's going to be the same principle again. That document that we have here is again saved in the SharePoint. So if we have a look into our FO templates again, we'll see there is an entity report, the vendor fact sheet, and just look very quickly, if we open that, it will look very similar to what we've already seen with the blue fields, with everything that you can design in that document. And also again, you can test it here. In this case, it doesn't have, like this would be the limit to any of them. This is, if I leave this blank, it's going to include all of them, but still for testing purpose, doesn't really matter if there's just one item or if there's all of them. But I think in terms of performance, it's also nice to see. So even if there are a lot, you can integrate them. So we've just generated a document with 43 pages. It's still going. It's a Word. Word has problems. Oh, there we go. 245. And the feedback we get also in terms of the performance is very good. So I hope you've also seen this in the demo while having a Teams meeting at the same time, taking some resources off. I'm in my home Wi-Fi and everything works perfectly fine, all in the cloud. All right. So much for finance and operations. Before we finish this, I just want to quickly show you the CRM integration. So there is this basically same principle. We are just within CRM at this moment. So there's the generate documents. We want to return PDF quotes or whatever. That's the same that we've basically already seen. I just want to show you additional one where there is create a draft email with Docs42. And what this does, it's basically creating a document, attaching it to an email, and then retrieving that email for me as a draft. And then I have the option to just send that from my very inbox. So everything that I will then do will be able to be done from my inbox. For many scenarios, of course, it makes sense to just keep it within the system. So you also want to make that traceable within CRM, within finance and operations. But just important at this point to know that there are different options where you can offer users different experiences. Both are perfectly fine if you want to send them directly or if you want to have like this. And there's a sales quote. And again, that sales quote is in integrating data from SharePoint, from CRM, from finance and operations at the same time. The last scenario that I wanted to show you before we start into the questions is the employees list in SharePoint, and the same web service that we've leveraged within finance and operations, and the same web service we've also leveraged within CE, we can also use here. So also in terms of licensing, it's very handy to just have one solution for many different options. Let's take an open PDF list and generate the document, which in this case also is integrating with charts. So there is basically the definition of a very simple bar chart that we already defined in Excel. And based on the data that we integrate, it's automatically rendering the new charts. And it's doing that with based on each of the items. For 3 items, if you still go for a manual process, it's probably still doable, although still a chore. If you decide to go for let's say 500 items, it's quite impossible to do that without automation. And also with the dynamics. So if the dynamic of document generation in this case, the user wants to select something, wants to provide something easy, wants to generate documents, but doesn't want to care about anything in the background. And that's something you can do here. And also the same case for another scenario that we have with SharePoint here, for example, which would be employee contracts. And let's take any of these. And again, I have different options. I could just save many at the same time. Again, into SharePoint, but also for the same capabilities. Just for Michaela, for example, there again are different options. Let's do open as a PDF just for a quick show up. And then there is another document that we've just generated directly from SharePoint, in this case, with the same service that we've used within Finance and Operations, with everything that we've provided in here. All right. Last part of the live demos is just, I promised you also that we can do PowerPoints, and we can either do one in CE or the same thing also in here. Let's just, for the quick demo purpose, do it directly in SharePoint. Because when we are generating a sales report in SharePoint, in this case, while we are generating that document, we are reading the data at the same time from an SQL-based ERP system, like it is with the AX. And we can again combine those data sources. So at the one hand, we are reading the sales performance data from the ERP system. At the same time, we're reading the images and the information from SharePoint. And since Microsoft is also pushing to bring all of them closer together, we're trying to fill in with that strategy. There is a sales report. If we quickly have a look, you will see that the first slide includes the 3 we've selected, but there's also slide 2 and 3 that have a repetition very similar to what we've already experienced in the table. So again, here we can do a repetition because slide 2 is equal to 4, is equal to 6. It's basically just a repetition of slide 2 and 3. And in the template itself, we just have 1, 2, and 3 as the slides, very similar to what we see with blue fields. And it's rendering the charts again, and this time more complex than just the bar charts. Right. And there we go. So before jumping into the Q&A, let me just quickly sum up what I was trying to show you today, and what I was hoping you got from what we've seen. When it comes to document automation, I think it's important that documents are intelligent and you want to deliver high quality documents. So also, like we've seen with the conditions, that's something you can do. Of course, I don't necessarily need to speak about the time saver. Also in the session of Dr. Ludwig, you discussed this. Finance and operations is very cool in terms of this, because the issue of document generation has already been there for quite some time, and we don't need to say how much time it could save if it's done correctly. Then, of course, there's the design in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint to be easily done. In terms of the flexibility, anywhere where you can integrate a web service, you can integrate Docs42. So if you want to leverage that in a custom application, go ahead and use it for your document capabilities. That's perfectly fine. We've also had a lot of data sources that we've seen. The individuality in your CE is basically in Word. So everything a marketing user can do in Word, that's something they can do directly. And what I didn't discuss too much today, but is a very strong point, I guess, is that in terms of the Microsoft and the ERP trends, we are, from my experience, also bringing the borders a little down. So it's not just like one monolithic system that has to have everything, but it could also be that some are combined, and you at some point need to talk to the team from CE, combine their data, for example. And also in terms of the Microsoft data, well, I don't need to tell you about it, but they are also pushing the data closer together. And in terms of having the right data at the right time is something we all embrace, right? So that the data is correct, that Power BI also in the after analysis works. So much about that. And let me just quickly open up Teams for questions.
Thank you again, Johannes. And yes, there are many questions. The first question is by Christian Sutherland. And the question is, the sales invoice generated, how does it connect to D365 Finance? How does it connect? Does it connect via web service?
Yeah, absolutely. So what with the template itself or the service? Um,
Christian, feel free to unmute your mic if you want to ask further. But I believe he's just asking how do you retrieve the data to generate the invoice? But please feel free, Christian, if you want to
oh
elaborate
yeah,
on
yeah.
that further.
I see now. Thanks, Christian, for the question. So Docs42 is integrated as a web service into within the lifecycle services. There's also the web service to the Docs42 data integrated, and we're basically for the reports connecting to that web service that is then allowed to read the reports that you have already seen in the list. Well, let me just quickly go back there. So basically, with this configuration, you're allowing Docs42 as the web service that is integrated with the lifecycle services to connect to these data sources for the reports and for the OData data sources. So for the entities, we're just connecting directly within to the web service to retrieve our entities. Hope that answers the question. If not, just please repost.
So Jane has asked a few questions. Jane's first question is how to configure FinOps for Docs42. And his second question is, will Docs42 consume FinOps data entity?
Yeah, absolutely. So second question, the data entity, yes, like we've seen here, it can either be just an entity report where it's just getting data from the entity or for the entity, but you could also combine report data and entity data at the same time.
And Omar Awan's asking, can we assign individual users to a specific printer for a different report using Docs42?
Since Docs42 is doing the printing within finance and operations, but the printer itself is again addressed by finance and operations. I'm not 100% sure in the case, but I'm guessing it would be the finance and operations standard setup for the user to be able to get to the printer.
Okay, okay, yep. So Moritz Preller, I think he's from South Africa. He's saying he wants your combi van to travel all the way to South Africa.
To surf.
Yep. So guys, so I don't know if you've seen the chat window. I have provided the survey links. Please complete them. And if you to provide your feedback and to be entered into the prize draw. We do have lots of Lego to give away. We've got some other Star Wars Lego to give away as well, and a mechanics Lego as well to give away. So yep, and I've also shared Johannes' contact details. So please contact him via his email that are provided. Also the contact details of Docs42 on LinkedIn. As well. So make sure you follow them and you obviously add Johannes if you need to follow up on any questions or want to set up a demo. Let's see, are there any other questions related to Docs42 or to document automation in general? I know people have got very specific requirements when it comes to document generation. Everyone, enterprise applications do have very, very specific requirements, challenging requirements. So make sure you fire your questions across, and I'm sure.
There's another question I see from Christian regarding the emailing. And Christian, yes, absolutely. So the way I set up the archive with SharePoint as automatic output, you could also do the same thing for emailing. So basically, while printing the invoice in finance and operations, it would be saved to whatever you define as the receiver to be emailed automatically. And for Osman, where's the price and license policy for Docs42? Generally, the licensing is add-ins and server. For details, feel free to just contact me, or this is the actual contact form for our homepage. We'll also be on a lot of other events. Maybe also I want to just quickly share these in the chat. So that's our event page. That's the download page, and there is the third link is the details around the SharePoint integration. So there's another video we did on this. Sorry for interrupting, Ras. just saw the question.
Yes, I'm just looking at the other questions, really, just seeing what other questions there are. So just want to make sure that we've answered everyone. So obviously, yeah. You've answered Christian's question. He's happy with that one. Yep. So please, we've still got a couple more minutes to pick up any more questions. Obviously, the next session is about how to upgrade. To FinOps with Peter. So I know a lot of you are waiting for that session, which will begin in 3 minutes. Yes, it says here there is one question by Zahir related to, does the data fields use D365 entities to get fields with OData or direct query, or a different mechanism, since you mentioned caching? So that's yeah.
Do I see the question somewhere?
Yeah. It's so basically it's quite high up. It's basically he's asking.
I see it. So here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tahir, for the question. Yeah, it's reading that through OData. I'm guessing that answers the question, because it's we're just addressing it directly. And also for the OData entity connection, if you just work with the add-in, you'd also be able to get the data already just in Word, because it's we don't need any web service with the lifecycle service to be integrated to read data for the entities, as it is OData directly. So that is reading through the ODatas, yes.
Okay, so everyone's it looks like we've answered everyone's questions. So thanks again, Johannes, for spending your time today, for the community to address their challenges. Yes, you can also join Johannes and his team on further events. We have a retail event, Dynamics, as you know, the new commerce product that Microsoft has announced on the FinOps stack, and many of the other collaboration events. So you can see all those events here. So there'll be more opportunities for you to find out more. And also opportunity to win prizes. Like I said, we are giving away people who complete the survey. We do have Star Wars and Mechanics Legos we'll be giving away. So please complete the survey if you do want that. Want to be so thanks again, Johannes. Fantastic session once again. You covered a lot of ground.
Thank you too. It was great being here. Thanks again for having us, and